What a great way to end the weekend, to have a conversation with our little community. I see there's already a super chat that's in the docket, and I can't seem to find it, so I don't know what they asked, but that's okay. But yeah, folks, I'm glad to be here with you. This will be a great little conversation. I won't be giving a big epic speech or anything like that, but I will do my opening remarks, then do the roll call, and then from there I can answer your super chat questions. Um, should be fun. So glad you're all here with me. It's been good. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. I know a lot of people have not been getting those notifications, so make sure that you try to be able to get those notifications. We don't want you to be left behind. I always enjoy talking with you all. We are a very lovely little community. I think we are. We're a great little community here. Is it better without this light? Oh, it is better. I think it's a much better shot without that light. Look at that. A much better shot. So I'm going to leave that light out. Actually, I'm going to do it this way so you can get a better image of me. Yeah, we're a lovely little community, and it's great to be able to just get on here and talk about world events. I can answer your questions. We have our running jokes. I've got plenty of unnamed diet water in my tin can here. And yeah, I've got a few items I wanted to share with you all. If you can, post this on Facebook, post this on Twitter, post this on Reddit, post this on anywhere that lives are shared. I always love to have a conversation with everybody, and the more people here, the more fun we will have. It should be good. I've got a couple news items to share with people. Then we'll just go straight into our roll call, and then I'll answer your super chat questions. So a couple things I wanted to mention. So, folks, I don't know if folks are aware of the fact that earlier last year, not a full year ago, like in the summer of last year, I debated this internet video game playing personality, who we now refer to as Jabba the Vosh. I think he refers to himself only by the last name of the title we have given him. Jabba the Vosh. Jabba the Vosh, he is this, I don't know who he is. I mean, apparently his father is a wealthy Hollywood producer of some type. He started getting on the streams of Destiny, who I've also debated, Destiny. And he got on the streams of Destiny as Destiny's favorite anarcho-communist or anarcho-socialist or Marxist or whatever. And Vosh is just amazingly ignorant, this character. Doesn't really understand Marxism, and he announced to all of his followers that anybody who supports modern socialist countries like Vietnam, Cuba, China, anyone who's what he labels a tanky, according to Jabba the Vosh, is according to him is the same as a Nazi. And he apparently, this was a running theme on his lives, that you can be interested in Marxism, but Marxism just means worker cooperatives, and that anyone who actually supports existing socialist countries is worse than a Nazi. And that was just a recurring theme. And so a number of people reached out to me telling me that he was saying this, and also that, this isn't just some random person. He had, hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. This was a big, out of nowhere, big social media game. Interesting, never part of any socialist group, never really known to anyone in the left socialist movement, just some weirdo on the internet who plays video games but has a well-connected father. So out of the blue, Jabba the Vosh suddenly, and he's on there and explaining to everyone in the internet, all right, EFF, South Africa, explaining to everyone on the internet that clearly real Marxists don't have anything to do with existing socialist countries, and those who do are actually Nazis. So I debated this person, and I did fairly well in the debate. He was fairly obnoxious in our interactions. But one of the big points that Jabba the Vosh made in our debate is he asked me about Uyghurs in China, and I said what I've always said in response to the situation about the Uyghurs. We don't have all the facts. We don't know what's going on. Is it possible that China is doing bad things? Yes, very possible. But should we, based on the sources that are making these claims now, we don't really know that. And I've made videos saying that. I've given interviews to say that. And I'm not the only person saying that. I mean, Gray Zone has done great reporting and shown that the source for a lot of the allegations is a pastor, a fundamentalist Christian pastor named Adrian Zenz, who has some rather shady beliefs. Liberation Theology. All right. And that, it's not exactly just, undisputed fact. So he asked me about that, and I said what I said. We don't have enough information to claim that China is full-on committing genocide. Is it possible they're doing bad things? Possibly. We just don't have the information. And a lot of the sources making these claims are not very credible. That's all I said. And of course, he then said, that's a lot like people who say the Holocaust didn't happen. And I said, no, the Holocaust is one of the most well-documented events in all of human history. This is an ongoing event about which we're not sure. And he went crazy. You can watch the clip. I've posted a whole clip. Hot takes on Canada. All right. And I posted an entire clip of, it's entitled, just that section of the debate, Vosh equates China with Nazis and the Holocaust, because that's what he said. And if not only does he make that equivocation, but anyone who doesn't, apparently, according to him, is the same as people who deny the Holocaust. And he proceeded to claim that I'm the same as people who deny the Holocaust. And I pointed out that no, just because U.S. mainstream media makes an allegation does not mean that it's true. Nordstream 2, and there's many examples of U.S. media lying, and he just kept saying, no, you're a genocide denier, you're a genocide denier. He just kept hammering this home. Well, here's the thing. The U.S. State Department has now confirmed exactly what I said in that debate. The U.S. State Department, lawyers from the U.S. State Department have come forward and said there is not enough evidence to say that China is committing genocide against Uyghurs, which is exactly what I said. I never said they weren't. I said there's not enough evidence to conclusively say that. That's all I said. And he proceeded to equate me with a Nazi. He incited all of his internet followers against me, and he has repeated this over and over. He said I'm a, quote, literal Nazi on his streams. Socialism. He said that. That's that. He just continues to make this claim. Well, now we have the U.S. State Department saying it. And let's remember, he urged everyone to vote for Joe Biden. He campaigned like crazy for Joe Biden. So I have now basically been vindicated. What Vosh was telling his followers I was a Nazi for saying is now something that's being widely said by the U.S. State Department. Okay, scriptural appeal to Christians. To Christians, manufacturing. Back to USA. Socialism. All right. Iran. Writing down all these super chats as they come in. All topics I would be happy to talk about. Books on FSLN. All right, very good. And no need to apologize. I love super chats. Happy to answer them. So, I was right. I was right, and Vosh was wrong. And what Vosh was, his argument was never a factual argument. He was never arguing with anything I said. He was simply arguing this kind of moral claim, and his argument basically amounted to, you are not allowed to question any allegations made by the U.S. government. Orthodox. Why? Seeing some themes in the questions tonight, but that's okay. I'm happy to answer them. All right. Heritage Foundation. All right, I'm just writing them down. Plenty to talk about. So, his argument was never factual. It was simply that if someone is being accused of genocide, if you disagree with the allegation, and thank you, Austin, you are the same as Nazis. That was his argument, even though there have been many, many, many instances where the United States media and the U.S. government has lied and accused socialist countries of doing things, or accused anti-imperialist countries of doing things to justify their military interventions. Many, many examples. You know, there was, during the lead up to the Gulf War, when they had the Naria testimony, this girl that was basically an actress saying, Saddam, they're taking the babies out of the incubators. It turned out to all be a big, big lie. The weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, remember that? The Gulf of Tonkin, supposedly the Vietnamese attacked the United States. Turned out that was all fake to justify a war. The lying in order to justify wars, the allegations that communists are the aggressor, you know, these things, you know, the U.S. invasion of Panama was supposedly because Panama had fired on U.S. troops. But it turns out the U.S. troops went to the border in Panama and provoked, and basically provoked the situation so they could be fired on, right? There are many, many examples of this. Many, many examples. Yugoslavia, right? They said Slobodan Milosevic was committing genocide. Then the UN said, oh, yeah, that's not true. He's not actually committing genocide. Many, 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 many examples of U.S. media lying about this. And so now we have the State Department coming forward and basically admitting that, yeah, you cannot say China's committing genocide. That doesn't mean they're not doing anything bad, but there's just not substantial evidence. The exact same thing that I said was said by the U.S. State Department. But Vosh still has fans. People still listen to this guy, right? Why? Why would anyone listen to this person? You know, I mean, this is shocking to me. And does he then apologize? Is he apologizing? Oh, wow, Caleb is right, according to even the U.S. State Department now. Maybe I shouldn't have gone around trying to incite left violence against him. Perhaps I shouldn't have. No, you know, and all these people that tweet at me, you're a genocide denier. No, I'm just stating the position of the U.S. State Department. You know, all these people, you know, I mean, are they going to apologize? Are they going to change their position? You know, defenders of U.S. mainstream media really, really count on people having a short memory, right? A short memory, right? It's they really count on people not remembering that what is now the official position of the U.S. State Department, as of now, it was, back this summer, a reason that I was the same as a Nazi. You know, Joe Biden, he was supported by Vosh. Vosh was urging all the leftists to vote for Joe Biden. Joe Biden's State Department got in there and said, yeah, what Mike Pompeo was saying about Uyghurs in China, not substantiated. So, I mean, look, folks, I mean, if you know anyone who's still a Vosh fan, confront them about this. They need to be confronted about this. Don't let this go. Don't let them just, oh, you know, that was last. No. He didn't just say I was wrong, okay? It was a moralistic, you are a Nazi. He said, isn't this a lot like saying that the Holocaust didn't? No, it's not. Right? We need to beat this drum. Don't let them get away with this. Don't let them get away with it. BreadTube, the entire BreadTube universe was making all kinds of nasty personal attacks on me and you and all members of our community. Not just me. They went after, who else did they go after? Historic Lee and Ben Norton and anybody who didn't go along with this narrative. Anyone who didn't go along with this narrative that China is guilty of mass genocide against Uyghurs. Anybody. Oh no, you're the same as a Nazi. We all have to believe it. Turns out that what we're saying is basically confirmed by everybody. So, don't let this go. I mean, I think that this is once again a case where My suspicions were correct. I didn't see a substantiation here. I didn't see true claims, and so I had suspicions. Now, I wanted to also bring your attention, because every so often, and this is the thing, right? So now we have the U.S. State Department coming forward and saying what we all said all along. This was an article that was in the Wall Street Journal weekend edition. And it just kind of, it's interesting. It's not exactly the same kind of situation, right? There was no alleged atrocity being faked. I mean, the atrocity really happened. But so this article from the Wall Street Journal, the unintended consequences of hashtag bring back our girls. Now, do folks remember bring back our girls? It was 2014, and I was working at the United Nations. I was the UN correspondent for Press TV. And one day I came to work, walked up to the UN, and in front of the UN there was a rally of thousands of people with big signs that said, hashtag bring back our girls. And what was that demonstration, that rally about? A lot of Africans were there. A lot of white Americans were there. Bring back our girls. What was going on? Well, Boko Haram, which is a Wahhabi Saudi-aligned Wahhabi terrorist group in Nigeria, extremists. They now have changed their name to ISIS in Africa. They kidnapped, they broke into a Christian high school, a Christian boarding school in Nigeria, and kidnapped a number of, teenage girls. And so Barack Obama and Michelle Obama immediately started a social media campaign called Bring Back Our Girls. And it was all about bring back our girls. The Pope got involved, and presidents and world media, they all got involved. And what it was really about, it wasn't, obviously these young girls were kidnapped. That was wrong. Everyone wanted them back. No one likes Boko Haram except for maybe the Saudi government, but we can't necessarily prove that. But no one in their right mind likes Boko Haram. They're Wahhabi extremists and terrorists. So, Boko Haram, they did this, but it wasn't just about bring back our girls. It was about expanding the U.S. military presence in Africa. It was all about, look, these terrorists kidnapped these teenage girls, so we need to send the U.S. military to Africa. And there's already AFRICOM, which is a huge, huge apparatus of U.S. military forces on the African continent. Oh, no, not enough. We need more U.S. military forces. Bring back our girls. No, you can't discuss this. And people got so emotional, right? The same story over and over again. These heart-wrenching videos on social media, the parents crying, I'm worried about my daughter, the pictures of these girls, the images of Boko Haram cutting people's heads off and how scary they are. And you would say to people, wait a second, okay, I'm not for Boko Haram, and I'm not for these girls being kidnapped, but do you really think we should really be sending more U.S. troops to Africa? I mean, after all, no, people would go, oh, I'm being emotional, don't talk to me, and they get everyone into this emotional frenzy, right? And you're like, wait a second. All right, so, obviously this Boko Haram terrorist group is no good, and obviously these girls should be returned to their families, but do we really need to send drones and armed? No! Everyone just gets emotional, right? And they get everyone into this worked up, crying state, right? Where it's like, oh, the girls, oh, the girl. And you're like, wait a second, okay? The U.S. military has been in Africa for how many years? How many countries have they destroyed? Look at Libya, Somalia, and do we really need a bigger U.S. military presence in Africa? But no, everyone was bring back our girls. It was a hashtag. No, God, how heartless you are, Caleb. You don't care about those girls. I do care about the girls, okay? I'm just telling you that the USA has been in Africa, occupying countries, waging coups, overthrowing governments, and it hasn't had good results. And now these drone strikes are pretty awful, and that's what Obama's talking about doing. He's bringing drone. No! And they just get into this hysterical, emotional thing. You don't care about those poor, innocent girls. Oh, my. It was this awful, awful moment, right? And you had to support Barack Obama sending more soldiers to Africa. And if you didn't, you were a bad person. And if you asked questions about U.S. foreign policy, if you asked questions about how the U.S. government has been operating in Africa and how, Africa has gotten significantly poorer and significantly less stable, and that the longer the USA has been in Africa, the more these terrorist groups seem to grow. And you can't ask those questions. Oh, no. Oh no, you just have to, no, you have to retweet Bring Back Our Girls, you have to cry, and you have to support Obama sending the military to rescue those girls. How dare you, Caleb? How dare you, leftists, criticize Bring Back Our Girls? Everybody knows that clearly the answer to this awful kidnapping at this boarding school in Nigeria, clearly the answer is more U.S. military presence in Africa. This is how they do it, right? It's just classic social media propaganda. So now that's long gone. I mean, that's a long time ago. That happened, the kidnapping was on April 14th, 2014. There is a very big expansion of U.S. military presence in Africa. All kinds of things have gone on. So now, we can just talk about, well, what was the results of this? This article is called The Unintended Consequences Bring Back Our Girls. This is not from the communists. This isn't from, media that's critical of the United States. This is from the Wall Street Journal. This is a neocon newspaper owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation. This is what they are saying. The frenzied international coverage inspired both a race to free the women and a shift in Boko Haram's tactics. The hashtag unwittingly provided Boko Haram with a roadmap to use gender violence to further its global brand. All right? Since then, Boko Haram has kidnapped more than 10,000 boys as child fighters, as well as a similar number of girls and women who were ransomed to their families or forced into marriage. The USA sent Global Hawk drones and a 40-person team to Nigeria, a staff to rescue, plus some 80 troops to the Dictatorship of Chad. The UK sent spy planes, while France and Israel offered intel. What has happened? Boko Haram, the terrorist group that supposedly the U.S. troops were going to Africa to stop, is stronger. And it's realized that kidnapping people gets them social media attention. So, according to the Wall Street Journal here, since Obama did his, hashtag Bring Back Our Girls, ever since this whole, social media campaign, all about how we have to send more troops to Africa because girls got kidnapped, more children have been kidnapped, and the terrorist group that does the kidnapping is stronger and has decided that kidnapping is a more effective tactic. And they've turned it into propaganda. Meanwhile, the U.S. military presence in Africa has expanded. Mission accomplished. The article ends. It ends with the question, is social media a force for good? So they're basically admitting, Bring Back Our Girls made things worse for girls and boys in Nigeria. Bring Back Our Girls strengthened Boko Haram. Bring Back Our Girls led to more kidnappings of both boys and girls by the Boko Haram terrorists. All that happened as a result of Bring Back Our Girls, the ultimate result was more U.S. troops in Africa, more instability in Africa, bigger terrorist groups, and more kidnappings. So all the people that were on there, all the emotions that they amped up with their social media campaign, the ultimate result was hurting the people that they were claiming to help. It made things worse. Just like we were right about the Uyghur situation. Those of us who back in 2014 said, okay, obviously we don't want these girls to be kidnapped, but, do we really think it's a good idea to expand the U.S. military presence in Africa, to have more drones in Africa? We were right. Things got worse. It did not help. There are many, many, many examples of this. Many examples. U.S. media really counts on you not paying any attention, on you, living in the past. Another great example. I'm just looking through the paper, right? Just stuff that's been happening. So I don't know if people know about, the Huawei. Huawei's chief financial officer was detained in Canada, right? Chief financial officer of the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world a Chinese company called Huawei Technologies. They've alleged that in a document, Meng, who is the chief financial officer of Huawei Technologies, that she lied. She lied to HSBC Bank, one of the big Wall Street banks. It's called the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. It got rich by selling opium to China. That she lied to them about China and its business dealings with Iran, and so that's what she's being charged with. And she's in Canada, and they have, for the last couple of years, been trying to deport her, to extradite her from Canada to the United States. This is a very wealthy woman in China. And basically, according to the Wall Street Journal, this is ongoing. The U.S. has accused Ms. Meng of misrepresenting the relationship between Huawei and a company called SkyTech Company, which did business in Iran, to HSBC, including in a PowerPoint presentation handed to an HSBC banker in a Hong Kong restaurant in August of 2013. The U.S. has alleged that HSB subsequently relied on the presentation to clear millions of dollars in transactions that potentially had violated sanctions against Iran. So they're alleging that this Chinese telecommunications company lied to a bank in order to get some money cleared and violate sanctions against Iran. That's the allegation. Right? Now, Huawei, the company in question, Huawei Technologies, the biggest manufacturer in the world of telecommunications technology, they are being portrayed in American media as, just pure evil. Oh, they're just absolutely, it's an evil company. It's tied in with the Chinese military. You can't trust them. They're awful, and they're evil, and they're maniacal, and they're part of a big conspiracy. It just so happens they make phones that are a lot cheaper in terms of cost than Apple phones are, and are much, much, much more productive. I mean, they're just better phones. They don't break as easily. They have better cameras on them. They have much more storage on them. They make better phones that cost less. And it just so happens that the U.S. government, it's a security concern. We got to stop Huawei Technologies. And it's funny, again, they are depending on you not having a long memory, right? And we're told that Huawei is everything. It's corrupt, it's evil. So I have here in my hand, this is an article that was published by Harvard Business Review. Harvard Business Review. September 24th, 2015. Now, this is, again, not according to some anti-imperialist news source, not according to the Marxist Daily. This is the Harvard Business Review. The title of the article is Huawei, a case study of when profit sharing works. Interesting. Right? Talks about Huawei Technologies and how it was set up. Right? At Huawei's inception, it designed the employee stock ownership plan. At the time, the founder had no idea what a stock option was, not being familiar with it at the time, and the types of incentives that were being developed in the West. Around that time, China was still struggling in the aftermath of the Cultural Revolution, and being a private owner and thus a capitalist was still perceived by many as an ugly thing. In light of that, the founder of Huawei felt that not owning the company was also the least dangerous thing for a founder to do. Right? And so the company is owned by its workers. It is a worker cooperative. Right? It's the only Chinese company that receives more revenue from markets outside of China than from inside of it. It employs 170,000 staff, including 40,000 non-Chinese, and serves 3 billion customers worldwide. This is the Harvard Business Review. Right? The harder you work, the more you can earn, but working overtime is only rewarded if the work directly addresses the needs of the customers. People care about belonging to and being proud of a collective, but also have a desire to differentiate themselves from others. Huawei's employee stock ownership program can satisfy both human needs. It emphasizes the idea that Huawei belongs to everyone in the company and expects all employees to act like owners with a dedication and commitment. This entrepreneurial spirit allows the company to learn and innovate collectively in support of Huawei's mission to improve life through communication. The article goes on talking about what makes Huawei so effective. is the fact that it is an employee-owned company. It is a cooperative, that the workers of Huawei own Huawei. All this worker cooperative stuff that we're constantly hearing about, right? All these fake socialists on the internet who are saying, oh no, China's not socialist. China's not socialist, right? Cuba's not socialist. Venezuela's not socialist. Socialism is when you form a worker cooperative. Well, folks, the only really successful example of a worker cooperative in the world today is in China. The Chinese Communist Party created Huawei as part of its state centrally planned economy where profits are not in command, the Chinese Communist Party is. And now, according to the Harvard Business Review, Huawei is a great example, a case study of when profit sharing works. So, state socialism does worker cooperatives better than stupid anarchists do. Let me repeat that. State socialism does worker cooperatives better than stupid anarchists do. There is not a single worker cooperative in the world that some anarchist built in their backyard because we can't have state socialism that has done anything remotely near what Huawei has done. Not Mondragon in Spain. It's great. I'm not opposed to it, but this is the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. The biggest worker cooperative in the world was created by the Chinese Communist Party, and it's subsidized by the Chinese government, and it works with the Chinese military. This is a highly successful, the most successful example of worker cooperatives in the world was created by state socialism. Okay? So these people that are all talking about worker cooperatives, and worker cooperatives is why we should never support any existing socialist country, they should look at where the most successful worker cooperative in the entire world is. But of course they don't count. It's not really a worker cooperative. And of course the Harvard Business Review, you can't trust that. I mean, I'm just telling you folks. So while you follow the whole case with Meng and the struggle to extradite her and the persecution of this very important Chinese businesswoman, they should be pointing out that she is the director of a worker cooperative. Right? She's not it's not just a telecommunications corporation, it's a worker cooperative. It's an example of a worker cooperative that actually works. People all over the world have Huawei phones. Governments contract Huawei to set up their telecommunications. Huawei, a worker-owned company, was created by the Chinese Communist Party. So, even when it comes to worker cooperatives, you want to play that game. Oh, no, I don't believe in state socialism. I believe in worker cooperatives. Well, we Stalinists, we state socialists, we tankies, we do worker cooperatives better than anarchists do. State socialism does the worker cooperative thing better than these folks do, right? BreadTube has been epically defeated. They were wrong about the Uyghurs. They were wrong. I'm sure they were all tweeting out, bring back our girls. I don't go there. Come on now, Zach. And, they were all tweeting out, bring back our girls. And now they were wrong about worker cooperatives, too. I mean, the BreadTube universe is so wrong about so many things. There is a real tradition of socialism and revolutionary politics in the United States of America. There is a real tradition of anti-imperialism around the world. There are many anti-imperialist states. And those of us here on these lives, we represent that tradition, and we're keeping that tradition alive. We are anti-imperialists. There are great worker cooperatives in Venezuela right now, collectivos and communes. And yes, BreadTube, at this point, Biden's been reelected. I mean, we'll see what happens to BreadTube. I mean, maybe they'll need to keep it around to counter Trump, but maybe not. We'll see what happens to BreadTube. Yeah, it seems like those of us who really genuinely believe in socialism, who genuinely have studied Marx and Lenin, who aren't, crypto liberals, those of us that genuinely believe in overthrowing imperialism and capitalism and building a society where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not profits, it seems that we continue to be proven right by history. We are right in many cases. And these folks get it wrong, and then they pretend that nothing happened. They count on us having a goldfish memory. So there you go. Just wanted to share those news items with you. Not a big, long opening spiel tonight. That is my opening remarks. So now I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Overcome malignancy. Malignancy. What is malignancy? Malignancy. I don't even know what that is. All right. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. San Jose. Free Julian Assange. I agree. Australia, Poland, Knoxville, Tennessee, California, Henderson, Nevada, Northern California, Montreal. Very, very good. Very, very good. All right. West Covina, California, Chris, Branson, Missouri, Queens, New York City, Nate in Chicago, David in China, Iowa, Benton Harbor, Michigan, Auckland, New Zealand, Belize, New York City, Malik Shah, Robert Webb in Hawaii, Brian in Los Angeles, Springfield, Missouri, USA, JT24 in Mississippi, Clydebank, Ramiro in East LA, Minnesota, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Valparaiso, Chris from Valparaiso, Alberta, Tucker Marks in Springfield, Missouri, West Palm Beach, Jeff in Grand Canyon, NRW, Germany, Knoxville, Tennessee, Paradise, Babylon, Virginia, the fact of being malicious. That's what malignancy means? The fact of being malicious? Missouri. Adri from Indonesia when speaking about communism. Fairhope, Alabama. Brazil. John in Houston. Central Pennsylvania. Maine, USA. Ricky Rosso from the failed state of Texas. Ireland. West Palm Beach. East New York. Melbourne. Germany, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Daniel in Los Angeles, South Carolina, New York, Nashville, Kieran from San Diego, Four Oaks, North Carolina, B in Cleveland, Glasgow, Scotland, Sweden, New Jersey, Northern Michigan, Ypsilanti, Michigan, I've been there before, the apartment on Weird Street, Germany, Chile, Scotland, Texas, Brooklyn, Newton Grove, North Carolina, Rust Belt, USA, Alberta, Canada, Chicago, Io, Hillary in New York City, Arthur in Phoenix, failed state, Rocks, Pennsylvania, Milwaukee, Detroit, Michigan, Buenos Aires. Very good, very, very good. Any other names and locations? Names and locations while we're here, folks. Names and locations. Johnston County, North Carolina. Ludwig the 14th from Versailles. Pat from Los Angeles. All right. Nate from Sydney, Australia. Thank you for reading that. I promise I'm not trolling. Definitely love the content. Factory of Ideas. Very, very good. 15,000 subscribers soon, says Arthur Porter. Hit the subscribe button, folks. Hit the like button. Let's build this channel. Let's build up this community. Nothing I'd rather be doing here on Sunday night than talking to all of you. Space Coast, Florida. Terschling, the Netherlands. Very good. Very, very good. Anyone else with us tonight? Anyone else? Anyone else with us? Names and locations. Clinton, North Carolina. Clinton, North Carolina. Very, very good. Very good to have you, Clinton, North Carolina. Anybody else with us? Juan from Mexico. Welcome, Juan. Tennessee. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Anyone else? Anybody else? Anybody else? Toronto. Toronto. Very good. Very, very, very good. All righty. All right, folks. Now, we've got a number of super chats. Before we get to them, I want to remind everyone to hit the like button, to hit the subscribe button, to hit that notifications bell. I know some of you are not getting the notifications. I know some of you have been unsubscribed, against your will. It just kind of, the algorithms do that. You can Google it. So yeah, hit the subscribe button. So yeah, folks, I'm very happy to answer some of your super chat questions, but keep the super chats rolling in. I will answer your super chats. If you give me a super chat, I will give you an answer. May not be the answer you're looking for, but I will still give you an answer to your super chat. Another quick announcement I want to make. Patreon friends, those who are subscribers on Patreon, we have a patrons only stream coming up. That will be a week from tonight. We will do a patrons only stream. So if you want to get in on that action, you can join the Patreon. That's down below. If you want to get in on the action, just sign up on Patreon to be part of the patrons only stream. That's happening a week from tonight. So there you go. That's something you can be part of if you want to support the work we're doing. And the patrons only streams, for those who've been on them, they'll tell you it's very laid back. It's very chill. I just answer your questions. I don't come with a prepared script, no super chats. I just sit there and I answer questions. I introduce everyone in the chat. It's like a community conversation. There, I have the number of people that are on Patreon is certainly not anywhere near the number of people who watch these lives when they're streamed. So it's a very laid back, chill thing. And I'm also a lot more frank on Patreon. I open up more about topics that I don't generally want to get into in a completely public forum. But people ask me my opinions of different communist groups and some of the inside baseball, some background such, and I will open up a little more about certain details on those patrons only streams. So if you want to be part of the more intimate side of this community, you want to get in on the Patreon action. That's fun stuff. So yeah, there you go. So now I've got a number of super chats to answer. So we'll just start banging them out. The super chats. What do I think of the economic freedom fighters of South Africa? For those who don't know, the economic freedom fighters are a party, a new political party. They were a split from the African National Congress. The ANC is the main political party in South Africa. There are people in the African National Congress who felt that the ANC had sold out and had not been left-wing enough, and so they formed a new party called the EFF. However, in response to that, we saw the ANC taking kind of a left spin and talking about land redistribution and such. So I don't take sides in that dispute. I know there are a lot of very sincere African revolutionaries that are in the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party. I also know there are a lot of very sincere African revolutionaries that are in the economic freedom fighters. I just want South Africa to develop. I want more people to be raised out of poverty. I want South Africa to develop into a prosperous socialist society. I know there's a lot of difficulty there. There's a lot of poverty in the country, and there's still a lot of frustration with the lack of a change in property relations. Many people hoped that when apartheid fell, it would lead to a socialist state in South Africa. And at this moment, it has not. South Africa remains largely capitalist. There are Marxists and revolutionaries in the government, but it has not really changed property relations. There's frustration about that, especially amid the global economic crisis. China is an increasingly important partner with South Africa, as is Russia. So, on that note, I can understand the frustrations, and I don't generally take sides in that dispute. I know there are disagreements, I hope that eventually the various revolutionary forces of South Africa can be back in the same party. They can agree on some kind of solution, and they can move ahead, and that South Africa can move towards socialism more quickly, and that both the differences that have created and cemented those divisions in South Africa can be overcome. That is my position. All right. Now, someone asked about liberation theology in the First World. Well, it's interesting. Now, we have to be specific about what liberation theology is. A lot of people think that liberation theology is just any attempt to, promote socialism or communism, in a Christian way. That is not what it is. Liberation theology is a very specific movement that originated in the Roman Catholic Church in the post-World War II years. In the Second World War, after the Second World War was over, in the 1950s, the Vatican was in an anti-communist frenzy. Right? In the 1950s, the Vatican was very, very, very anti-communist. And in the United States, there were like Roman Catholic trade union federations, that fought to get communists kicked out of unions. And, the Roman Catholic Church really hated communism in the 1950s. However, there were many people in Latin America, South and Central America, who were oppressed and were colonized and were struggling for their rights and were inspired by Christianity. And starting really in the 1950s and 60s, you started to have priests in the Roman Catholic Church who interpreted Christianity in kind of an anti-imperialist and socialist way. That was the origins of what you might call liberation theology. Now, what's interesting is that the Roman Catholic Church has officially denounced liberation theology because the Roman Catholic Church opposes all Marxism. So there was never a full endorsement of this. Any Marxism is still opposed by the Roman Catholic Church. However, the Roman Catholic Church has also denounced capitalism. They argue that capitalism violates Christian principles, etc. Liberation theology was a movement of Roman Catholic clergymen starting in Central America, South and Central America, who were becoming sympathetic to Marxism. And then you'll recall that then there was what they call Vatican II, when the Roman Catholic Church changed a lot of its beliefs and policies. They started giving the Mass in the common language rather than in Latin. And the Roman Catholic Church suddenly became far more critical of the United States and its foreign policy, and far less, they turned down some of the anti-communism. I mean, they still were an anti-communist force, but it wasn't, a hysterical crusade like it was. So in the 1960s, Vatican II kind of gave a boost to liberation theology, but liberation theology was never the main trend in the Catholic Church. Now, there were various movements in Latin America. The Sandinistas in Nicaragua that I talked about were an explicitly Roman Catholic and Christian movement. And there were many progressive movements in Latin America that were embraced by various clergy, and that's liberation theology. That's different. Now, Christian socialism is something completely different than liberation theology. You have to remember, Christian socialism has long predates liberation theology. That goes back to before Marx. There were what you called Christian socialists and utopians, and those were people that believed that the Bible clearly says capitalism is wrong. They were mainly Protestants, and they formed communes and cooperatives and intentional communities or idealistic communities centered around socialistic values, and that existed. Utopian socialism was around, and there were, Henry Saint-Simon, who first used the word socialism in French, was a Christian and was a religious figure. You had in the United States many colonies, little utopian communities set up by white European settlers here in the United States. Near where I grew up in Ohio, near Akron, Ohio, there was a village called Zoar. Zoar, Zor, and it was a utopian Christian socialist community. Eventually you had Robert Owen. Now, Robert Owen was not a Christian. He was a little more of a religious skeptic and a believer in some mystical, occult stuff. But Robert Owen set up New Lanark and New Harmony. But yeah, Christian socialism has been around a long time. It was mainly associated with Protestants because Catholicism, the way it was structured, you couldn't reinterpret things, right? The Protestants, there's a million denominations. If you want to be a Christian socialist, you just start your own denomination. Well, the way the Catholic Church was structured, it was much more difficult to have an independent interpretation. When the Catholic Church said Marxism is a heresy, it was very difficult to be in the Catholic Church and say, okay, I think Marxism is okay. Vatican II kind of opened the door to allowing liberation theology to expand. But Christian socialism is a widespread trend. There's been widespread. There were mass parties. There were Christian socialist parties. The Labour Party in Britain still has a Christian socialist faction in the Labour Party of clergymen, Christian socialists in the British Labour Party. From what I understand, in addition to that, there was something called the Fabian Society among British intellectuals. H.G. Wells and Bernard Shaw and some other intellectuals in Britain were associated with something called Fabianism, the Fabian Society, and they were very much inspired by Protestant theology and had a social democratic or socialistic outlook. So liberation theology, the question was, would liberation theology ever catch on in the first world? Maybe. Something similar to it or something inspired by it, could definitely catch on. Look, Michael Moore, the filmmaker, many of his movies will make reference to liberation theology in a vague way. In his movie Capitalism, a Love Story, he interviews a Roman Catholic priest who says that capitalism is not consistent with Christ's teachings. And there are vague references to liberation theology in the films of Michael Moore. I know Dennis Kucinich, who was for a long time a member of Congress, and he was a mayor of Cleveland back in the 1970s. He was Roman Catholic, and his beliefs were very, very heavily influenced by liberation theology. He very much, participated in protests. Now, someone in the chat mentioned Dr. Cornel West. Well, again, Dr. Cornel West is influenced by liberation theology, but he's a Protestant. Critique of the Goethe Program. He's a Protestant, right? And I mean, his religious background is not Roman Catholic liberation theology, but it certainly has had an impact on him. And he's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. He's a leftist, and he's also a clergyman. And so there is widespread influence of liberation theology in the United States, no doubt about it. But if you're talking about liberation theology as a specific movement that originated in Latin America in the post-World War II years, up into the 70s and 80s, that movement, I think, I don't think the USA, there is a lot of Latino folks here, there's a lot of Roman Catholic folks here, but the USA is far more religiously diverse. I don't think you could have a liberation theology government in the United States. But as far as liberation theology expanding among the US population, more Roman Catholics in the United States adopting a liberation theology outlook, I definitely think that could happen. The Catholic worker movement, and that's, again, not liberation theology. That's something different. There was a woman in New York City who was a left-wing activist who was kind of a friend of the Communist Party. Her name was Dorothy Day, and she had a religious conversion, and she became a pacifist, and she started something called the Catholic Worker Movement. And it was this kind of, idealistic pacifist community, and they're still around. The Catholic Worker Movement is still around. Now, they are not liberation theology, though. That's a separate movement. See, you got to be specific when you talk about these things. And yes, liberation theology has had a big impact on the Catholic worker movement, but they're not the same thing, right? Dorothy Day and liberation theology have very different views on a lot of issues. They have had an impact on each other, but they are not the same thing. And so the Catholic worker movement, liberation theology, Christian socialism as a trend, these kinds of things are widespread. Now, someone's asking about Reverend Jeremiah Wright. Well, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, let me emphasize, is not liberation theology. He's not Roman Catholic, and he's not in Latin America. And, he is Reverend Jeremiah Wright. He was a United Church. He is a United Church of Christ pastor his influence was what they call Black liberation theology, and that's different than liberation theology. Liberation theology is a Catholic movement. Black liberation theology was a movement among African American clergy that embraced the Black liberation movement and some aspects of both Black nationalism and Marxism. And there's a long tradition of that, and there's many examples of radical clergy in the Black community. That's Black liberation theology. And Jeremiah Wright, United Church of Christ, and his church is one of the most prominent African-American churches in Chicago. Oprah was a member of his church at one point. Obama was a member of his church. Do folks remember that when Barack Obama's pastor, Jeremiah Wright, was on the cover of the news? And yeah, that's a whole thing. So, something influenced by liberation theology definitely could expand. Liberation theology itself could expand in the United States, but we have to talk specifically about what we're talking about. A lot of people's minds, liberation theology, Black liberation theology, Christian socialism, utopianism, Catholic worker, all these things run together. Well, they don't all run together. These are separate movements, right? Just like a Trotskyite is not the same as a Maoist, who's not the same as a Hojaist, who's not the same as an anarcho-communist, who's not the same as a Marxist-Lenin, right? These are differences here. And, we talk about the narcissism of small differences in our movement, right? But to be fair, people who take their beliefs very, very seriously are going to be specific about their beliefs. When people say that communism is everyone sharing the wealth, I always raise my hand and say no, because I am serious about this stuff, and I explain what communism and Marxism are, right? And that that if you are going to be passionate about your ideas, it's important to know them with some level of depth. You can't just these vague platitudes, people have spent their whole lives writing books and building communities and organizations centered around Christian, Christian socialism or Black liberation theology or liberation theology. People are very serious about these concepts, so it's important to represent them correctly. And if there's someone watching, by the way, who feels like I'm not representing liberation theology, Christian socialism, Catholic worker correctly, please, by all means, send me an email or shoot me a comment or whatever, and let me know, because I work very hard to know this kind of thing and get it right. So there you go. I don't know why that was an interesting way for that super chat to go, but there we go. Next super chat. Hot takes on Canada. Hot takes on Canada. What about it? Never been there. Believe it or not, I've never been to Canada. I have been to many countries around the world. I have never been to Canada. You would think it's right next to the United States. I've never been there. Many people are critical of some of the liberals kind of idealize Canada. Canada is a society, and it's more, I guess you could say it's more social democratic than the United States. They provide health care for the population. They provide education for the population. Um, you know, but at the same time, it's still a capitalist country. The First Nations peoples of Canada have been treated horrendously, and there's a very ugly history of what was done to the Indigenous people there. There are big class divisions in Canada, and that Canada is a country, and that one thing that it's kind of a sin of social democracy is that many Canadian leftists that I've spoken to feel like American leftists, for their own kind of propaganda, purposes, because they're trying to make a point, they kind of over romanticize Canada. And they make it sound like Canada is a socialist country or Canada is some kind of paradise. Well, no, Canada has more of a welfare state than the United States, but that's about it. It's heavily involved in a lot of U.S. imperialist operations. There are big class divisions in Canada. There are big neoconservative movements. There you go. One thing that I think is interesting is how many internet personalities are in Canada. It's weird. In this world of internet politics and YouTube web streamers, how many of them are Canadian? I'm not even going to start naming names, but just start thinking about big names on the left, big names on the right. If you are making YouTube videos about politics, about socialism, about right-wing stuff, Canada, it is weird that so much YouTube social media content that is out of the mainstream of U.S. politics comes out of Canada. That's a little bit peculiar. It's a little bit peculiar because there's so much of it, right? Jordan Peterson's in Canada, right? What is it? Tommy Lauren is in Canada. What's his name? Stefan Molyneux is in Canada. Jason Unruhe is in Canada. There's many. I just keep naming names. I could go on all night. It's weird. Radical politics. Far left, far right, they're in Canada. I don't get it, right? I'm not in Canada. I'm in Brooklyn. So there you go. How might media change in 21st century America, socialist America, upholding free speech? All right, very good. Media. Very good question. But yeah, it's a little bit weird. There's a very big overrepresentation of Canada in the media of both the far left and the far right and the social media activism. I don't get it. I don't get it. And it's not all on one side, right? It's not like, oh, Canada's a far left. No, there's plenty of far left people up there, but there's plenty of far right-wing people up there too. I don't get it. I really don't get it. I don't know why. And there's nothing wrong with it. Why not? I guess maybe it's just a skill. Maybe it's something that Canadians are really good at. Maybe Canadians are really good at making social media content about politics. Maybe it's something about the Canadian spirit, right? It's in there with snowshoes and hockey and I don't know. Funny, I used to on PBS they used to show clips of a comedian called Red Green, and he was from Canada, right? And he would do jokes about like kind of outdoorsy kind of humor about and fixing things. It was kind of like Home Improvement, except a little bit more. It was straight comedy. It wasn't like a sitcom, and it was from Canada. So there you go. There's a lot of things about Canada, right? The leader of the Communist Party of Canada for many years was a guy named Tim Buck. And he was the leader of the Communist Party of Canada. And I used to joke that, on his deathbed, everyone was waiting to find out who would be the next leader. If he would appoint someone to be the new leader, they were wondering who would be Timbuktu. That's my little joke about Canadian communism. Who will be Timbuktu? Alrighty. Anyway, I'm going to stop. I have enough of a Canadian audience. If I keep talking, I'm going to say something I regret. I'm going to offend somebody. I've talked about Tommy Douglas and Cats and Mouse Land and all right. Okay. As the Socialist USA's rebranding, you think a new flag should be adopted. All right. New flag. New flag in Socialist USA. Okay. Alrighty. Will the USA be able to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline? I don't know. I mean, they'll try. It looks like it's being finished. I mean, it looks like they haven't been able to, but never say never, right? Never say never. Economy of Mexico and NAFTA. Never say never, right? I mean, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, it's a pipeline so that Russia can sell natural gas to Germany and other European countries in Central Europe. And the United States is desperate to stop it. They don't want Russia to expand its economic, ties. They don't want that. And they've been putting sanctions and doing everything they can. So there you go. All right, socialism as a transition definition. Very important point. Very important point. So this is, when we talk about what is socialism and we talk about what is communism, there's a lot of word games here, right? I mean, you can talk about, I was taught in school, communism means everyone gets paid the same wage, no matter how hard they work, and, that's communism. Socialism is just when the government does stuff, and we're half socialist in the USA because we have a post office. There's all of this confusion, right? So then on the left, you get people, like Jabba the Bosch. Socialism, all the socialist countries are fascist. All the socialist countries are fascist. Socialism just means worker cooperatives. And then you get people who say, well, I'm a socialist. I'm not a communist because I believe in freedom and democracy. Communists are evil dictators, but I'm a socialist. There's a lot of confusion. So what is the scientific Marxist understanding? What is the scientific Marxist understanding? The scientific Marxist understanding is that right now, in the United States, and most of the world, we have a system called capitalism. And capitalism is a system where the banks and the factories and the major industries, the major centers of economic power, the commanding heights of the economy, the means of production, function to make profits for their owners. Right? We have production organized for profit. That's what we have. Profits are in command, and those who rule the society, the ruling class, are those who own the means of production, the capitalist class, the people who own the big box stores, the people who own the oil wells, the people who own the banks, the people who own the pharmaceutical giants, the people who own the manufacturing corporations, the car companies, the owning class. They are the ruling class, and they control the government. They have the economic resources in their hands, and they control the government. And the state, under capitalism, functions to protect their class interest. So the idea is that the proletariat, the working class, will rise up, and it will carry out a transition towards socialism. It will take control of the government. And when the working class takes control of the government and transforms the state, creates a new government apparatus, that is called the dictatorship of the proletariat, right? And right now, we have the dictatorship of the capitalist. Well, when the working class controls the political power, this is called the dictatorship of the proletariat, because instead of the capitalists dictating, it is the broad majority of people, on behalf of all of society, the working class majority, dictating. So that's the dictatorship of the proletariat, seizure of political power. Then, when they've seized the political power and established the dictatorship of the proletariat, the new state will centralize the means of production and organize the means of production so that they don't function according to profits, so that we have an economy that is production upon a predetermined plan. To a small business. Frederick Engels talks about production upon a predetermined plan. The state controls the major centers of economic power. Production is no longer subject to the irrationality of the market. No more is, production organized to make profits, but you have centralized planning, and that leads to growth. So that is what Marx referred to as the first stage of communism, or the lower stage of communism, and is generally referred to as socialism. And that's what they have in the Soviet Union. That's what they have in China. That's what they have in Cuba and Venezuela, other countries like that. The major means of production are controlled by the state, centralized, and as a result, As a result, profits are no longer in command. Production is not organized for profit. It's organized according to the state central plan for the benefit of society. That is the lower stage of communism. There might be private businesses in that. Might be private businesses, might not be, there are different forms of it. But the defining character of the first stage, the lower stage of communism, is that production is no longer production for profit, is production for social use. That's the lower stage of communism, generally referred to as socialism. Then there's the higher stage of communism, which is after like thousands of years of the first stage, of the lower stage. The lower stage is a transition to the higher stage, meaning that as production expands, as living standards increase, the need for a government fades away. Living standards expand, technology advances because it's no longer in contradiction. Technology doesn't make people poorer. The amount of abundance in society expands, and the need for a state starts to fade away, and we start to have a society without coercion, where people can just kind of do what they feel like doing, from each according to their own ability, to each according to their needs. That's the higher stage of communism, and that the lower stage is largely seen as a transition to that higher stage. So that is what is meant when they say socialism is a stage of transition. It is the economic foundations that make possible the higher stage of communism. Now, there are ultra-left elements that try to use the phrase that it's a transition to point to countries and say that's not socialist. They can say, oh, look, in China, the state controls the means of production. It's not production simply according to profit. But I look at China, and they don't seem like they're moving toward communism, so therefore it's not socialist. Well, that's ultra-leftism. They look at Cuba, and they say, all right, Cuba, means of production are organized according to public good, not profits. It's not a profit-centered economy. However, I look at Cuba, and their social relations don't seem to be moving toward my ideal egalitarian vision. So therefore, this is a misrepresentation. Marxism puts economics first. And this is what a lot of new left elements and ultra-left elements don't understand. The foundations of communism are economic. They're not moral. Okay, the basis of building a society with no oppression, no coercion, each according to his own ability, each according to their needs, the basis of that is economic abundance. And that's very clear if you read something someone else asked me about, the Critique of the Goethe Program. And we'll talk a little bit about it later, but in the Critique of the Goethe Program, Marx is criticizing the German Social Democratic Party. They write a manifesto, the Goethe Program. Marx reads it, and he says they don't understand. They've got it all wrong because the foundation of the higher stage of communism is economic. Right? It's not moral. It's not like we just train people to be good and eventually they don't need to train us. We can take the dog leash off. No, that's not how it works. That is not what Marxism teaches. Marxism teaches that with central planning of the economy, with the irrationality of capitalism lifted, the production can expand greatly, human wealth can expand, the economic base can become so vast that the need for coercion can gradually fade away. Marxism puts economics first. So socialism is a transition to the higher stage of communism in that it is laying the basis for building that higher stage. That's the difference, right? If it weren't for socialism, China would still be a deeply poor country. But with socialism, with a centrally planned economy, they created a higher level of abundance, right? I mean, the same goes for Russia. Russia used to be a deeply impoverished country. It was with Stalin and the 5-year plans that they greatly expanded the production apparatus. They electrified the country. They raised millions out of poverty. And the idea is that with central planning, more and more growth can take place, more and more abundance can take place, and as society becomes more prosperous, the need for coercion fades away. Number one, because why you don't need laws, you don't need, enforcement as much, you don't need, rigid discipline and authoritarian structures because there's a more prosperous society, number one. And inequality also fades away. Why does inequality fade away? Because if everyone has enough, you don't need to hoard, right? And when everyone has enough, the difference between people, when there's a vast surplus in society, the difference between people is going to start to become less and less relevant, and the inequality fades away. And that is the understanding of the higher stage of communism. It's based on vast material abundance, expanding the productive apparatus, making a huge amount of increased living standards to the point that the divisions between people fade away, the divisions of labor fade away, the division, you can read the critique of the Goethe program. I read it to Jason when I debated him on this point. This is what is meant by, that is what is meant. So there you go. And we'll talk more about it when we get to the super chat on the critique of the Goethe program, because I've got a couple things about the critique of the Goethe program, one of Karl Marx's most important texts that we should discuss. All right. Making a scriptural appeal to Christians. Well, I think that's a good thing. Look, I look at the life of Jesus Christ, and I think that he very much incarnated revolutionary ideas and socialistic ideals, and I think that it's definitely possible to read the Bible and make a scriptural appeal to Christians. Absolutely, I think there's nothing wrong with that, and we need to get over the anti-religious bigotry in the socialist movement. The idea that if you're religious, you're stupid, or we should, no. Obviously, we don't want to promote any anti-LGBT bigotry or any racism or any oppression of women or sexism, but obviously, religion is deeply important to many people. It's deeply important to many people, and I don't think Christianity and socialism are incompatible. All right. Would socialism bring manufacturing back to the USA? I think it absolutely would bring manufacturing back to the USA. I think it absolutely would. I think that, under public ownership, the steel mills and the factories, and I think in a socialist command economy, a lot more production would take place here. We wouldn't have a global apparatus of production tied in with huge multinational corporations. Instead, we'd have a state centrally planned economy here in the United States. So I think, yes, there would be more manufacturing in the United States. However, socialism would be trying to vastly expand technology. Expand technology. So human labor was less and less necessary in production. And with a centrally planned economy, that's a good thing. In a centrally planned economy, machines, eliminating human labor leads to greater prosperity. Under capitalism, we have a situation where machines eliminate human labor and more people are poor. Abundance creates poverty. Well, socialism creates a situation where you have a planned economy, and the more efficient production becomes, the fewer people. Things like self-driving cars are a good thing, right? That's the difference. And that's an important difference between capitalism and socialism. And the worker cooperative thing by itself doesn't absolve that. A worker cooperative, would want to eliminate labor with jobs, and it would result in more unemployment. There'd be fewer people needed in the cooperative, right? A worker cooperative, you're not getting rid of the problem of profits and command, right? In a rational society, self-driving cars would be a good thing. What would a world without imperialism look like? All right. All right. Okay. Why are Iran and Saudi Arabia not friends? Simple. Saudi Arabia is a tool of the international oil companies. It is an autocratic, backward, primitive regime set up by the British imperialists. The British found the House of Saud and their backward Wahhabi ideology. And they gave them control over the Arabian Peninsula and used them as their puppets. And the Saudis don't want to develop. They are very backward thinking, and they have kept their region underdeveloped, and they make lots of money from oil, and they buy lots of U.S.-made weapons, and they are a backward, autocratic society propped up by the imperialists to serve their aims. Meanwhile, Iran is a country that has broken out of Western domination, has an economy that is centralized around the state, has raised millions of its people up out of poverty, has a revolutionary Islamic ideology, not capitalism, but Islam. They reject Marxism, but they also reject capitalism. And as a result, Iran is an anti-imperialist country. So one country, Saudi Arabia, is an outpost of Western colonialism, and it's force trying to keep the Middle East in a state of primitive backwardness. Meanwhile, Iran is a revolutionary country that emerged out of an anti-imperialist struggle. It has anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist ideology everywhere, and it's trying to raise people out of poverty. It's trying to modernize, and so those are two different approaches. One is an anti-imperialist country, and one is an outpost of imperialism. That's primarily why they're not friends. But if you want to get into more specifics of it, Iran and Saudi Arabia are competitors. They both have lots of oil. And when someone buys oil from Iran, they are not buying it from Saudi Arabia. Someone's buying oil from Saudi Arabia, they're not buying it from Iran. So they're competitors in that sense, right? Iran has kicked out the Western capitalist oil companies. Saudi Arabia is in bed with ExxonMobil, BP, Chevron, and Shell Oil. So they obviously have differences in that sense. Iran's oil feeds the domestic economy. Saudi Arabia's oil feeds the pockets of Western bankers, and it makes the Saudi royal family richer, but Saudi Arabia remains underdeveloped. So there's an economic component to it as well. People want to make it an ethnic component, right? They say that the Arabs, the Saudis are Arabs, and the Persians, the Iranians are Persians. They don't agree with each other, but that's not accurate because Iran is very friendly to all kinds of Arab revolutionaries. There have been many Arab people fighting for their freedom who have gotten support from Iran. Bahrain is a great example. In Bahrain, the people of Bahrain live under a brutal dictatorship, backed up by the United States and backed up by the Saudis. Meanwhile, Iran is working with the Arab peoples of Bahrain to fight for their freedom and to fight for democracy. So if Iran was an ethnic conflict, Persians and Arabs just don't like each other, why would Iran be supporting the Arabs of Bahrain in their fight for freedom? Why would Iran be supporting the Shia Muslims of Saudi Arabia as they build trade unions and demand their rights? Shia Muslims in Saudi Arabia are horrendously discriminated against. So that is fundamentally, they are on opposite sides of the global class struggle. One country, Iran, has broken free from Western capitalism. The other country, Saudi Arabia, is an essential part of the global Western capitalist machine. That's why they don't like each other. All right. Good books on the Sandinistas. Well, last night I read many passages from a good biography of Daniel Ortega, The Unfinished Revolution, but there are many other books. Noam Chomsky wrote a book about Nicaragua. It's called Pirates and Emperors, and I read it when I was in college. Noam Chomsky wrote that. There are many, many good books on the Nicaraguan conflict. There's a scholar in the United States, a Native American scholar, who was an activist in the United States and a Native American activist, and she wrote a memoir about the Contra War and its effect on U.S. activism. Dunbar Ortiz, I think is her name, and I read that, and she talks about the despicable role played by Russell Means and Ward Churchill, and I quote from that. There's many, many, many good books on the topic. There's many good writings on it. Yeah. All right. Now, this person asks, they said, common theme here, the religion stuff keeps coming up a lot tonight. That's okay. I'm happy to answer those questions. So the person asks that they are an Orthodox Christian. Why is communism perceived as anti-faith? Well, the reason is that you have to remember the role of religion under feudalism and the role of religion under modern capitalism are very different. Okay? In feudal society, religion is not an option. Right? In a feudal society, the church is the state. The church and the state are almost synonymous. And peasants are told that they may not fight for their rights and that they must obey God by being peasants and not demanding justice. And if you disagree with that, you're burned at the stake. And under feudalism, religion is an essential part of propping up the feudal hierarchy. So many, Karl Marx and Marxism emerged after the overthrow and during, really, the overthrow of feudalism in Europe, right? The 1848 German Revolution that Karl Marx participated in was an anti-feudal revolution. And the main target of that anti-feudal revolution was the Roman Catholic Church. Now, there were some, there were forces like the Anabaptists that were very religious, like Protestant, fanatics, but Marx and many of the German revolutionaries in 1848 were very anti-religious. The French Revolution was very anti-religious because religion had propped up the old feudal society. Furthermore, Russia, when they had their revolution, right, the Tsar had not only had the Tsar been the king, but he had also been the Pope. He was the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. And feudalism in Russia was propped up by the church, and the church played the same role. And, China, now religion is a little bit different in China. It was not a Christian country, but in local areas, superstitions, like the idol worship and different superstitious practices were used to oppress the peasantry. And long before the communists came along, Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the founder of modern China, one of his first acts when he was a young man was to go to a temple where peasants were being forced to make sacrifices and to bow before these stone idols. And he smashed the idols, and he smashed them. And he said, this is backwardness. This is primitivism. We need to believe in science in China. And all over the world, when people have been struggling against feudalism, because in feudalism, the state and the church are almost synonymous, and because of the role of the church and the state in feudalism, religion becomes the main target. However, in a liberal capitalist society, it's quite different. In a liberal capitalist society, religion becomes far more optional. Now, there's exceptions to that, but for the most part, in the United States, you don't have to be religious if you don't want to, right? Now, when you're a child, many people argue that children's rights are violated. Children's, are forced to go to church against their will. Children are punished if they don't accept their parents' beliefs. That's true, and I experienced that myself, and it's not a good thing. But as an adult in the Western world, you can pretty much believe whatever you want. You can be an atheist, you can be a Buddhist, you can be a Muslim, you can be whatever you want. And so that gives religion a very, very, very different aspect. And based on that, I think that the relationship between communism and religion has changed. For example, Maduro is a Roman Catholic. Hugo Chavez was a Roman Catholic. Evo Morales, the leader of Socialist Bolivia, was a Roman Catholic. In the Muslim world, you have many Ba'ath Arab socialists that are Muslims. You have many Islamic anti-capitalists and anti-imperialists, right? So it's more complicated now than it used to be. It used to be that, yes, if you were rising up to overthrow a feudal society, your main target would be one of the most essential institutions in feudalism, which is the church. But now that capitalism has dominated the world, and the relationship between religion and the state has changed, and the nature of society, we don't have feudalism any longer. Things have changed. So that is why communism has been anti-faith, and that is why things have changed. The communism is now not very anti-faith. You go around the world, many communist parties around the world have openly Christian, openly Muslim, openly Jewish members. Right? The relationship has changed. If you think communists are people that go around, calling for, the elimination of religion and all that, you're a little bit out of date, right? About 100 years ago, you would be right. About 100 years ago, the word atheist and the word communist were almost synonyms. Nowadays, you'll notice that the main voices promoting atheism are ruthless defenders of capitalism, right? Ayn Rand said she was an atheist, and she believed in ugly free market capitalism. The new atheist movement, Bill Maher, and who else? Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, the main voices that are promoting atheism tend to not only be defenders of libertarian free market policies, but on top of that, they tend to also be vicious supporters of Israel and vicious advocates of imperialism in the Middle East, right? They justify it. A lot of the new atheist material, you'll notice that it has a little bit of a blind spot, right? It starts out by saying Islam is the most evil religion ever. Muslims are all terrorists. Islam is evil. Then it goes to Christianity, and it talks about Christians in the United States. Christianity in the United States is stupid, and they're bigoted against homosexuals, and they're idiots, and all of that. And then they'll, if they even touch Zionism and Judaism, it's very light. It'll be, in Bill Maher's movie Religulous, he says that Orthodox Jews are silly because they have silly hats. And then, and then it leads to the conclusion that that all the people around the world, and this is how Religulous ends. Bill Maher's Religulous ends by showing the Irish freedom struggle, by showing the Palestinian freedom struggle, and saying, oh, look, all of this conflict is caused by religion, as if the Irish people, they don't really want to be free, they're just a bunch of religious bigots. The Palestinians, they don't want to be free, they're just a bunch of religious bigots. New atheism is toxic, and generally it's a pipeline to white supremacism and the alt-right, right? It starts out, these young men, generally young men, who grew up in families that were deeply evangelical and conservative. They get, they discover, oh my gosh, that the Bible isn't literally true. They become new atheists. And based on that, they're very Islamophobic and all of that, because the new atheist movement tends to tell you that Islam is the most evil religion. So then after that, they decide they're libertarians, right? Because not only are they smarter than everyone who believes in God, they're smarter than anyone who would want, poor people to get welfare, or want, there to be a minimum wage, because they've read Adam Smith and they've read Friedrich von Hayek and all of this stuff. And then after a little while, they start, reading these outdated pseudoscience claims that some races are smarter and inherently better than others. And that's where you get white supremacists. This is a very well-documented pipeline that young men in the United States from conservative families who become new atheists tend to go on. A lot of the people that are now going around promoting white supremacism are people who started out as people in deeply religious families who became new atheists. New atheism is very toxic. Atheism is fine, if you don't want to believe in God, that's your business, right? And there's plenty, look, having grown up around evangelicals, there are plenty of very, 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 very dumb things said by evangelicals, okay? I don't want to offend anybody here, but I have, I can understand, that if you grow up around evangelicals, you go through an atheist phase. I was an atheist for a while, but, I was able to, rediscover my faith. And I rediscovered my faith when it became a matter of choice. And when, through my lived experience, and it was a different thing, right? But when I was growing up around evangelicals, when religion was being forced on me, when I was feeling alienated from the community I was in, when a lot of very, very not well thought out statements were constantly being made by people to justify why you should never question anything said by religion, I, in response to that, I was very much an atheist. But then as my life went on, and as I traveled the world, and as I questioned why I do things, and as I came to terms with who I am and why I do things, I rediscovered my faith. And it's a personal journey. And that is one thing I'm absolutely clear about. I believe that religion is a personal matter, right? If you want to talk to me about my religion, I'll talk to you about it, but that's my business, right? And I don't care what your religion is. You can be an atheist, you could be a Muslim, you can be Jewish, you can be Buddhist, you can believe in pantheism or paganism, or I don't care, right? And there should be no religious test in any revolutionary or leftist organization. No one should be told they need to adopt specific religious beliefs to be in it. No one should be told they're not welcome because of their religious beliefs. And I will work with anyone of any religious faith, and that revolutionary organizations should be secular, right? That it's a private matter. Your religion, your relationship with God, your spiritual beliefs is your personal, private business. And it has no place running the government. I do not believe in a theocracy or a religious state. And I believe in the separation of church and state, and I believe in freedom of conscience. Everyone's faith journey and everyone's spiritual beliefs are their own personal beliefs and no one else's. And that is my position, and it always has been. But if you're asking me why has communism historically been atheist, that's why. And why... But that's not the case anymore. In fact, the main voices promoting atheism are vicious imperialists and vicious anti-communists. Meanwhile, most of the forces in the world today, with the exception of China, that are promoting communism are friendly and sympathetic to religion. So there you go. All right. Okay. What do I think of the Heritage Foundation? The Heritage Foundation is a neoconservative think tank, and they are advocates of U.S. military interventionism. They are vicious anti-communists. They are Republican Party aligned, and I don't like them. I don't like them one bit. I'm not a big fan of the Heritage Foundation. Not a fan. Not a fan of them. Not a fan of them. Just like I'm not a fan of the American Enterprise Institute, just like I'm not a fan of the Council on Foreign Relations. I tend to not like capitalism and imperialism. I tend to be more of a socialist kind of guy. If you haven't caught up on that yet while watching these lives, just letting you know now, I'm a socialist. I don't like capitalism. I believe in a world where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good, not profits. That's what I'm about, so just letting you all know. All right, now someone asked about malignancy. Can someone define malignancy for me? Because I believe this is a question that deserves an answer, but I want to give it an answer that is legitimate. So could someone put in the chat the definition of the term malignancy? Can someone give me the definition so I can respond properly? What is malignancy? I do not know I want to get the definition correct before I respond. I think Infrared has a video about why defining words with definitions is not exactly correct, but, well, in this case, I'm going to need someone to give me a definition before I can totally respond. General sour feelings toward everyone and everything. Well, and the person asked about malignancy on the left. Well, in my book on Kamala Harris and the Future of America, I actually talk about some interesting facts. I don't know, Jared. I don't know about that. Never heard that. I talk about some interesting facts. Look, there's a very important book by Sigmund Freud, and it's called Civilization and Its Discontents. What's interesting is I don't agree with a lot of what Sigmund Freud says in that book. His conclusions, I think, are fundamentally wrong. However, he makes a lot of very astute observations in his book, Civilization and Its Discontents. He talks about a number of things. First of all, Sigmund Freud reflects on the fact that a lot of his patients who are religious, he says, they have this feeling of oneness, and that's what makes them feel good about being religious. They feel this connection with the universe, they feel this spiritualness, and that is what drives them to be religious. And he says he doesn't understand that because he doesn't feel that. Then he goes on to talk about how human beings have built-in sexual impulses and impulses toward aggression, and that what civilization is training people to control their impulses. Right? You can't walk around naked. You can't just punch somebody because you feel like it. That civilization, what we do is we train people. We come up with rules and laws to force people to control their impulses, their impulse toward aggression and their impulse toward sexuality, so that we can work together in groups as human beings and build a civilization. I think he's right about that. Right? He's right about the first one, the religiousness. I've experienced that. That's why and on top of that, he's right about the control of impulses. And he talks about how the revolutions that have swept Europe, really, the revolutions to overturn feudalism, really what was going on there was a renegotiation of the regulation of those impulses. We all have an impulse toward aggression. We want to tear things down. We have anger within us. We are outraged. We feel things are not fair. And we have these impulses. And that the way, and Freud doesn't say this, but I observe in my Kamala Harris book that a lot of the way that socialists and communists have taken power flows from the tradition of the French Revolution. In the French Revolution, in order to overturn feudalism, the French capitalists unleashed impulses. They unleashed the sexual and aggressive impulses of the population. They gave people permission to unleash their anger, and they gave people permission to unleash their sexual desires. And in doing so, they created a social explosion that enabled feudalism to be overturned and capitalism to be created. And that largely what leftists have done, unfortunately, is leftism has become synonymous with the releasing of impulses. Leftists generally approach society saying, we give you permission to release your impulses. And obviously Marxism is about a lot more than that, and there's a lot of left-wing ideologies. But if leftism is stripped of ideology, if it is simply an emotional movement, it gives people permission to release those impulses. And if you look at the woke crowd, you look at the SJWs on the internet, you look at cancel culture, that's what it is. It is these people's impulses towards aggression and their impulses towards sexuality being released. And stripped of ideology, leftism reduced to simply its psychological content, is nothing but the releasing of impulses. However, if you look at the socialist societies that have developed around the world, like the Soviet Union, like China, like Cuba, like Venezuela, those societies have been successful not by releasing people's impulses. Maybe there was a releasing of impulses at the beginning in order to make a revolution. However, if you look at what made Stalin's 5-year economic plans that made Russia a superpower and defeated the Nazis, you look at what made them successful, it wasn't releasing impulses. It was appealing to that feeling of religiousness. It was bringing the people of Russia and the Soviet Union together to work for a common aim and to feel a spiritual drive as if they were all in it together. If you look at China, the Cultural Revolution was a releasing of impulses, and it was awful, and it's remembered as an awful thing. But why is the Communist Party of China so loved? Because it creates a feeling of oneness. It creates a common humanity of the people. It brings people together and unleashes them to do amazing things together. And the mistake of communists is instead of appealing to that feeling of religiousness that Sigmund Freud is talking about, they appeal to that releasing of impulses. And that as we get away from feudalism and as we deal with a liberal society and capitalism, if leftist politics are going to be powerful, coast to coast AM, Jesus. If leftist politics are going to become powerful, we need to reorient away from appealing to people's aggressive impulses and sexual impulses, and instead toward creating that feeling of religiousness and oneness. And that the malignancy, I guess, I just learned a new word tonight, malignancy. The malignancy that people are describing on the left is a result of post-Cold War leftist politics, leftist ideology, and Marxist scientific ideology being stripped away, but that releasing of impulses and the psychological drive to release one's impulses becoming dominant. And instead, my feeling is that socialism and Marxism need to try to strive for those feelings of oneness. That has been my position for a long time, and that wokeism and IDPol and synthetic leftism and the destructive politics, the releasing of impulses. Look, that is the problem of leftism. We need to start building movements, organizations, and communities that appeal to that feeling of oneness. That feeling of oneness that the Soviet Union and China were able to appeal to in order to build great societies. I've seen that in Venezuela, that feeling of oneness, that sense of community. I mean, look, I'm just telling you that we need to change the psychological appeal of socialism. Socialism needs to become a constructive ideology rather than a destructive ideology. That has long been my position. And that was a long answer, but it's an important concept. Read my book on Kamala Harris. I use Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is malignancy. She is malignancy. She is a case study. I talk about her life story. I talk about her parents. I talk about the political atmosphere she grew up in. How is it that one could grow up in an anti-racist activist family and become a vicious, sadistic prosecutor who took pleasure in destroying people's lives? How is it possible? It's possible when politics is reduced to a crude Freudian manipulation. Read my book on Kamala Harris. A lot there. All right, next one. Next super chat. The Critique of the Goethe Program. The Critique of the Goethe Program. Well, that's an important pamphlet by Marx, right? In Germany, there was a socialist conference in Goethe where they wrote the manifesto of the Social Democratic Workers' Party of Germany. And that's now one of the largest political parties in Germany, the SPD, or the SDP. I can't remember which one it is. The Social Democratic Party of Germany. And Marx read their program, and he didn't like it. And he criticizes a number of things about it. One thing he criticizes is that the program calls for the redistribution of wealth. And Marx says he doesn't believe in the redistribution of wealth. Marx says he believes in control of the means of production and a changing of property relations, and that simply redistributing the wealth the workers create doesn't solve the problem. You have to change property relations. That's a big point. All right, lower levels of capital versus higher levels. All right. That you have to change the property relations. It's not a struggle to redistribute what the worker creates. It's a struggle to change the relations of production. And he emphasizes that. Another thing Marx emphasizes is that communism is only possible based on a vast material abundance, the expansion of wealth in society. So yeah, that's the critique of the Goethe program, and read it. It's Marx going over how his scientific socialism is different than what this social democratic workers' party came up with. All right. Media in 21st century socialism. I think that one of the main things that that a socialist society will do is it will empower average people to be more and more involved in the media. In Venezuela, the number of community radio stations, community TV stations has greatly expanded. Digital currency. It's greatly expanded. And, you know, part of socialism, I think, will be expanding access to the media and giving more of a voice to average people. Right now, even though we have the technology to very much democratize media, media remains very much concentrated in the hands of a few. There are a few people who have the ability to influence public views. Socialism will be about expanding public access and expanding the ability of average people with average lives and regular jobs to have radio programs and have TV programs and engage with ideas. And it'll be expanding and bringing people into the political process. And part of that will be expanding the involvement of average people in creating media and creating public opinion and having a voice. And I've seen how Venezuela has done that. Venezuela is a very poor country. Imagine what we can do here if the resources and the ability, if average people are brought into creating media. I think that would be a great thing. All right. What is it? New something in a socialist US. Oh, new flag of a socialist USA. And thank you, AJR, for the super chat. You know, I mean, the U.S. flag has changed many times. It always looks about the same, but the number of stars has continued changing. And you know, I mean, I think, you know, look, here's the thing. I mean, this is the last question and the next question, all right? I try to avoid getting into too much of this, right? Because the thing is, even if we had the exact same flag we have right now, but the means of production were organized to serve public goods, not profits, the USA would be socialist. Right? Even if the media were still, you know, concentrated, but, you know, it was under public control, you know, it would still be socialist. And when you start playing this game, what's the future socialist society going to look like? That's a little bit dangerous. I'll play it a little bit, right? You got to do it to some degree. But the reason it's dangerous is because you start to obscure the question of what socialism actually is. Socialism is a change in property relations. That's it. There are socialist societies that have done bad things. Did you know that? There are socialist societies where the government does bad things. That doesn't make them not socialist, right? And when we play this game, right, I've had people say to me, well, you know, in Cuba they have prostitution, so it can't be socialist. Why? Why? What in the world does whether or not there's prostitution have to do with whether a society is socialist? It doesn't, right? Socialist societies can have prostitution. Does that mean prostitution is good? Not necessarily, no. But that, you know, whether or not a society has prostitution or not, it's not the definition of socialism. And that's kind of, people get stuck in this. And when you start drawing a very complex blueprint, and I start telling you exactly what the flag of the socialist society looks like, the problem is that then, you know, some country around the world has a socialist revolution and keeps their same flag, and then, oh, they're not socialist. And this complex utopianism loses... You lose the scientific understanding of what is socialism and what is not. And that was my argument with Destiny. And folks will recall I debated Destiny's Stephen Bonnell, who is one of these, internet hacks who loves to debate bread tubers and stuff. And he wanted to know exactly how many French fries you get in the socialist society when you order a hamburger at the restaurant. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's like, you know, there's an episode of Seinfeld, where Kramer is becoming a communist, and he's walking, and the guy says to him, he's like, can you have a deli in communism? And he's like, sure, you can't have separate classes for the meat. It's silliness, right? And that this is, you know, we can play this game. We can sit around and dream up exactly what the ideal world would look like. But the reality is that the socialism that will emerge won't emerge because I sat around and dreamed it up. It'll emerge because of the real contradictions in U.S. society. The working class of the U.S. society is suffering. The capitalist class of the U.S. society is raking in billions and laughing as we suffer, right? There are communities that are impoverished. And socialism will come about with that contradiction being resolved. The working class of America will rise up and seize control of the means of production. And when they do it, that will be socialism. And how will they do it? It'll be up to them, right? I can't dictate exactly how they're going to do it, and I can't. It won't be up to me. It'll be up to the broad masses of people in their millions who make socialism. And when you start making a complex blueprint, you kind of lose that. That socialism comes into being as a result of class struggle, right? Not as a result of some guy's utopian blueprint being applied. And that's the danger here. Look, and I've had people say to me like, well, Cuba is homophobic, or it was homophobic, so therefore it's not socialist. And I've said, well, that's interesting, because, there are a lot of workers in the United States that are homophobic, right? Do you think if they took power tomorrow, somehow we had a socialist revolution tomorrow, all homophobia would go away? No, right? I've heard people say the Soviet Union was racist. Well, the Soviet Union did amazing things to help black people fight for their freedom, but was there race prejudice in the Soviet Union? Sure. Again, if the working class of the United States immediately took power today, you think there wouldn't be racism, right? That when you play this game of like, what will the society look like, you kind of lose track of the difference between capitalism and socialism, and you start writing a science fiction novel, basically. When you're actually for socialism to actually come into being, it means you have to harness the contradictions of the society. And one class has to seize power from another class, and that's very different than playing utopian games. All right. So I don't know what the flag will look like. I don't know. I mean, I doubt it will look the same. I would assume we would change it, but who knows? All right. The economy of Mexico and NAFTA. Well, look, Mexico used to have a lot of its own farmers, and NAFTA enabled American agribusiness to come and just shut down their farms. When I debated Destiny, I read to him New York Times articles about how Mexico has suffered because of NAFTA, and he insisted, oh, that wasn't true. Destiny, the thing was, I came to that debate with Destiny prepared. I knew that anything I said about socialism was going to be questioned, so I came with facts, and he was not prepared for that. He assumed that, there's no argument in favor of socialism, only an idiot would think socialism ever worked. Well, I came armed with facts, and he was not prepared for that. All right. Is there any desire to do away with small businesses? No, I think small businesses are going to be an essential part of a socialist society in the United States. I mean, I think there's going to be, restaurants that are family-owned, restaurants that are worker cooperatives, private, that there's going to be private capital to some degree in a socialist society. We've learned from the experience of China and Russia and such that you need some market sector to some degree. But the thing is, it's socialism because that market sector isn't dominant. The major centers of economic power are controlled by society. The means of production function, and even those private companies, even though they're trying to make profits for themselves, they're controlled by the state. At any point, the state can come in and tell them to do things that are against their interests. So when the economy itself is centrally planned and profits are not in command, there may be some profit element, but they're not in command. That's socialism, and I think you need that to some degree. Children's toys. No bureaucracy can make children's toys. Hotels, restaurants. You need some small businesses to some degree. We've learned this. We've learned this from the experience of the Soviet Union. What would a world without imperialism look like? The world without imperialism would be a world with growth. Technology would be expanding so much more rapidly than it is now. Countries around the world would be instead of having a relationship where one country preys on another country. All right. Tanky version of Jabba the Bosch. Instead of having a relationship where countries prey on each other, countries would be working together, and the creativity of one country and the creativity of another country would bounce off each other. And growth would just be astronomical. I mean, fusion energy would be boom, right? New artificial intelligence, boom. I think space travel would vastly expand, boom. All instead of the creative power and the technological abilities of people being used against each other, instead of huge efforts to keep countries underdeveloped, which is what the imperialists are trying to do, there would be nations all over the world rapidly rising out of poverty. The global living standards would vastly expand. That's a world without imperialism. Imperialism means keeping the world poor so that Wall Street and London can stay on top. That's what imperialism is. It is a global economic system where a few banks and corporations dominate the world, and they keep the world poor, and they make the world poor in order to stay rich. That's imperialism. Socialism and a world without imperialism would be eliminating that so that human growth is no longer restrained. Great reset. All right. All right. Coast to Coast AM. I don't listen to it. Isn't that like a conspiracy radio thing? They talk about like space aliens and UFOs and stuff. I don't listen to it. That's not. I'm not familiar with that. I've heard people reference it. But I don't really know much about it. All right. Okay. Lower levels of capital versus higher levels of capital. Look, historically in the United States, the lower levels of capital have been more right-wing. The John Birch Society, that was Robert Welch, who was a candy manufacturer. The National Association of Manufacturers that fought against the Rockefellers. Historically in the United States, the ultra-rich, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, the Morgans, they've been more liberal, whereas the lower levels of capital, the lower level capitalists, the National Association of Manufacturers, Henry Ford, they tend to be more conservative. And the reason is the ultra rich, they know they will get the government monopoly, right? So they're not worried about government involvement because they're rich enough, they'll be favored by the government because they're rich. And number two, on top of that, the ultra-rich have the ability. They're rich enough, they can think in a long-term way. Lower levels of capital are worried about going out of business. The ultra-rich are worried about some social upheaval that would potentially knock them off the top of the mountain. So the ultra-rich tend to have a pessimistic view. They tend to want to slow down growth. And they tend to just secure their spot and kind of manage the rest of the world like cattle. They have more of an entrepreneurial or social engineering viewpoint. The lower levels of capital have more of a they want to make money, right? They want to make money. And so they tend to have more libertarian views, right? Now, my feeling is that as Russia and China are rising, as countries around the world are moving towards socialism, as populism this may change, right? And it'll take a while. But right now, it's the lower levels of capital, the fracking companies that fund PragerU. It's the lower levels of capital right now are with Trump, my pillow. Whereas the ultra rich are the ones that are more liberal, and they're synthetic left. They are into social engineering. They're pushing climate change and the idea that growth is bad. We need to, that's that section. My feeling is that there may be a flip because populism is associated with the right, because the synthetic left is basically saying you can't be a real socialist and a leftist and be part of the left. Plus, Russia and China are rising, and lower levels of capital see trading with Russia and China as a way to make money, whereas the ultra-rich are thinking about global imperialism, and so they see Russia and China as a potential threat. There may be a realignment, but, who knows, right? If you ever want to make God laugh, just tell him your plans. But I think that we may witness in the next decade or so, gradually, a shift where the lower levels of capital who want more infrastructure in the United States, who want to see the living standards of the United States go up so they can sell more products, who aren't tied into a global monopoly capitalist system, but rather just have their short-term interests, I think there may start to be a difference. Is lower level capital based on wealth or industry? Of course it is, right? That's the lower levels of capital have wealth, and they tend to be, owners of industries, Yes, the highest levels of capital in the United States tend to be oil bankers, the oil banking elite, the Eastern establishment, right? I talk about the big banks on Wall Street. HSBC Bank is British Petroleum, and that's the Rothschilds. I talk about how ExxonMobil is the Rockefellers, and they're also Chase Bank, and they're in there with the Morgans, and that the ultra-rich tend to be oil bankers, whereas the lower levels of capital, you get some banking interests in there. You get fracking companies. You get, My Pillow. You get different different entities. There are divisions in the ruling class, okay? It's funny, a lot of the rhetoric against Wall Street, it's kind of interesting, when you talk about Wall Street, do you mean the Rockefellers and ExxonMobil and Chase Bank? They're on Wall Street. Or do you mean Wall Street stock trader guy? Because at the end of the day, low level, short selling stock trader guy, it's a hustle, right? And it's a hustle that, it's hard to get in. But at the end of the day, he's not really the guy running things. I mean, he's wealthier than all of us, but, he's got his gig, ripping off things with derivatives and stuff. But he's not, he may be part of the ruling class, but he's not big potatoes. I mean, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, yeah. I don't know what you're getting at, AGR. But it's important to talk about. It's been quoted to me many times that Vincent Copeland, one of the founders of the Workers' World Party, he said that there's a list published of the richest people in the world, and that list is dishonest, because the people on that list are generally people that are so poor they have to have their capital in their own name. If you look at who the richest people in the world, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, a lot of them, you can't tell how much money they have. A lot of the ultra-rich are quite anonymous. They don't want to be well-known because that's not their gig, right? And that a lot of the people who really have lots of wealth and power, you can't even calculate how much wealth and power they have. It's tied up in so many elaborate trusts and foundations. And so there you go. All right, digital currency. Not ready to talk about that yet. I have some very interesting ideas, but I don't want to say the wrong thing. I want to give you all a responsible answer, so I'm not going to answer that. Do we need a tanky version of Jabba the Vosh? No. I mean, I want us to have a tanky that's like not a complete slob and not a lying, hateful, insult comedian. You know what I mean? I'd like us tankies to be associated with a higher level of discourse. Vosh, I mean, look, why? I mean, that's an embarrassment, right? A guy who goes around saying that child pornography should be legalized and plays video games, and, he lives in Beverly Hills, and, he's from a wealthy family and all this, and he still looks like a complete slob and fool. Come on now. We can do better than that. Right? I mean, and if by tanky version you mean just someone who gets on here and talks politics, I mean, I guess I'm that, right? I'd like to have as many followers as he has. But I mean, we can do better than that. We tankies we should hold ourselves to higher standards. One thing, I'm not in the Communist Party. I am not in the Communist Party. But one thing I've always liked about the Communist Party USA, and I'll say this, is that their literature about, socialism and their platforms are always much more professional, right? Why is that? Because historically they had ties to the Soviet Union, and because they had ties to the Soviet Union, even though they weren't a mass organization with millions of members, they were held to a higher standard of professionalism, right? You read Trotskyite groups, right? Trotskyite groups, they will put out like pamphlets that are like monologues by the leader. Right? It's like the leader giving a stand-up comedy routine. And, you read some of these Bobavakian screeds that Bobavakian comes out with, and it's just, the guy's rambling about all kinds of stuff, no citations, and it's just, rambling anecdotes, long rambling anecdotes about... This Communist Party would never do that. Why? Because they were held to a higher standard of professionalism. We need to, as communists, be, that's why I'm all about wearing suits. That's why I'm always, look, I think that being held to a higher standard of professionalism is good. So no, I don't want there to be a tanky Jabba the Vosh. I want there to be a tanky Bernie Sanders. How about that? How about a tanky Bernie Sanders? That would be great if we had a tanky Bernie Sanders, someone as widely popular as Bernie Sanders was in Congress, wore a suit and tie, was widely loved, memes all about them, and they were a tanky. That would be awesome, right? So we need to aim higher than that. There's plenty of people on the internet who play video games who are like Vosh, who have tanky politics, and you're welcome. I don't have a problem with that, but we should aim higher than that, right? Because at the end of the day, Jabba the Vosh, at the end of the day, he's a spectacle. It's some kind of weird entertainment experiment. How do you tell if a capitalist is low? Moving on. Anyway, all right. Great reset. look, I mean, there's talk about the Great Reset, and with climate change, the capitalist class is scheming, and they're trying to make the most of the pandemic. The ruling class, they never let a good crisis go to waste, as they say. So, we know what they have in the works, and it's scary. I mean, their austerity fantasy of an austerity surveillance state, they're trying to use this pandemic to put it into being. And, I mean, there may be a time when we're not able to have these lives on here, right? I mean, we're going to have to figure out, right? And that's why we need to get together our Center for Political Innovation and build our think tank, because we don't know what's going to happen, right? I mean, the ruling class are moving swiftly ahead. They're fighting among themselves right now. The capitalists are fighting amongst each other as their system is in crisis. Russia and China are rising. So the world is constantly in a state of change. But yeah, this Great Reset is very scary. Yeah. All right, folks. That's all for tonight. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.